Thank you for joining XR Om, which is India's first AR/VR focused podcast. And today I'm delighted and honored to have with me Mr. David Mullett, who's the head of business development and strategic partnership at Senseglove. There's a lot of my listeners who really do not understand, what haptic feedback is, So maybe you could just explain what haptic feedback is and what does it do?
Yeah, sure. So haptics in general, there's different types of haptics. So when people normally talk about haptic feedback, that's normally about vibrations, and we call that vibrotactile feedback. So our glove has vibrotactile feedback and force feedback. So the vibrotactile, as I said, is a very fancy way of saying vibrations, sending vibrations to different points of the hand or the fingers. And we do that onto the thumb and the index finger, the back of the glove as well. So they're the three main points that we apply haptic feedback. But our unique selling point as a company really is our force feedback. So we have a passive force feedback system, which is basically a braking system. So we have strings that run down the back of the glove, and they work as tendons, or they act as tendons. And what we do is when somebody goes to grab an object inside virtual reality, the strings are basically attached from the end of the fingers down to the braking system at the back of the glove. And when you go to grab something in virtual reality, what happens is the brakes kick in. So they basically restrict your hand from pulling through the object. So when you're holding something, you can see something in virtual reality, like I'm holding this bottle, I can see that I'm holding this bottle, and we have some sort of resistance to really, add to the illusion that you're actually holding something when obviously in virtual reality you're not.
Vibro feedback is something that we already have on a phone. When the phone rings, the vibration. That's what you're using with vibro feedback. And force feedback, you mentioned. How you've got these strings which is attached, and it kind of gives you that feeling that you're kind of holding something. You know. So yes, I think we are kind of. I think the goal of virtual reality is to, create a world which is as close to a physical world, because with virtual reality, what we managed to do so far is that we managed to kind of simulate the visual and the audio pretty well. With the visual, we've done pretty good. With the audio, with the spatial and ambisonic audio, we're doing pretty good. And with haptic feedback, someday, right now we are possibly the nascent stage of kind of figuring out the grammar of how we can touch feel in the virtual world. But we're just understanding and leveraging all of these two, like you said, vibro feedback and force feedback, and there's others who are doing various other things, and there's so it's interesting space. Senseglove, would you like to talk about your company and what does it do and what are the products that you have at Senseglove?
So Senseglove has been around since 2016, 2017. So we started as a university project out of TU Delft, which is a very famous technical university here in Holland. Two of the co-founders were working on a rehabilitation glove, basically, that forced your fingers to move in a certain direction to help post-stroke patients. They basically thought about it, and they saw that the VR market and AR market was an upcoming industry. And they looked around, and there wasn't really much at that time making force feedback gloves. There was a few people doing vibrotactile feedback gloves, but they decided then to get rid of an active force feedback system, which forced the fingers to move. And they were like, well, how about we just make it a passive force feedback system and break the hands and try and make some sort of glove from it. So that's what we did. And we produced a device called the DK1, which is a big blue exoskeleton. That basically, did that. Had a little bit of vibrotactile feedback, but it was also, had force feedback, had 40 newtons of force per fingertip around that at its maximum. And we sold that to over 250 companies, universities, and research institutes worldwide in the first, around 3.5 years of having the product. And it was mainly a research and development glove, because DK1 it's short for development kit. So this was really for people just to test and try and see what they could build with virtual reality and integrate the gloves into their virtual reality scenarios. And really, it went on from there. So the DK1 was a big hit. There was a few downsides to it. So with an exoskeleton, you're normally tethered to a headset. So the headset has to connect to the computer. The gloves have to connect to the computer and the headset. So it had some limitations in terms of what you could actually do. And all of our customers said, look, it's a great product, but we need something more wearable, more easier to use, something that takes a couple of minutes, well, a minute to put on and take off. And then we really sort of went back to the drawing boards and created our newest product, which is the Senseglove Nova. And that is, wireless, just has to connect via Bluetooth, which I'm sure we'll go into on what we do at Senseglove. So at the moment, we only have one product on the market, which is the Senseglove Nova, because the DK1 came to its end of life the December last year, because we really wanted to focus all of our production efforts on the Nova.
So David, thank you for explaining about your DK1, the first haptic feedback glove, and then you also mentioned that 250 companies have used it. What's been the learnings from there, of those companies using it, and how you're using it to iterate on your product and leverage it for the Senseglove Nova?
Yeah. So what we've really learned is that most companies, when they're going to use a glove or a device for training, they really want it wireless. Having all of those wires in the way with the DK1 was a big negative. And really, we live in an era where people want things that are streamlined, easy to use, comfortable to wear. We're kind of spoiled with the current technology at the moment, with companies being so good at delivering such high quality products that everybody expects that, even in a very new and upcoming industry like the haptic and force feedback industry. Where, that was basically the biggest lesson we learned, was people want something slim, easy to use, but also with the same accuracy and the same power, which is something that we are battling with a little bit with the Nova. But that's just one of the trade-offs.
Right, and I guess with the growth of technology, the way it's accelerating, it's becoming accessible also. So I guess yes, I mean the consumers want something which is simple to use, easy to simple user interface. I guess that's the way it's going to be in the future. Amongst the use cases, you said there's 250 companies which used your DK1. I'm sure there's been expected use cases, like the VR training or, things like that. What was the unexpected use case of the DK1 or the Senseglove, which is really surprised you that, haptic feedback glove, that you have created could be used in that fashion?
So training people on how to cut some sort of meat was a very strange one. We never thought that the gloves would be used in that industry. The meat cutting one was the strangest one that I've seen. I didn't even really think there was much of a meat cutting industry, but apparently it's a very big industry that I had no idea about. So that was probably the strangest one that I'd actually heard of.
Lovely. So this is possibly the meat cutting training. Maybe the students can actually virtually cut a piece of meat and understand. How do you? How cool is that? The world is getting super exciting with the Metaverse and Web 3.0, and we just laying the building blocks of the phygital or the digital world that we all talk about, and the interaction. How we'll kind of interact in that digital world is an open question, and I think haptic feedback will play such a huge role in human interaction in the Metaverse. Would you like to shine light on some of the use cases of haptic feedback, and especially when it comes to Senseglove?
Some of our biggest use case would be with an automotive company that you probably heard of, is Volkswagen. So they used our gloves for an assembly line. So you had to assemble the electronics inside of one of their car doors, and they basically built a whole environment with that whole production process, and then they integrated our gloves into the scenario. So when you're interacting with a drill and you're interacting with wires. You can move the wires with two hands. You can attach them into the door. You can pick up the drill. You can actually drill the bolts into the car door as you would in real life. And the main thing is that you're acting and you're doing all the actions as if you would in real life. That's the whole thing. You want to have the most natural interaction possible. So that's the biggest problem that people have with controllers, is that they're not really doing the things they would actually do in real life. But when you put on a pair of gloves, you have to. You can't click a button to interact with an object. So that was our biggest use case. And then after that, we did stuff with the Dutch military as well. So installing a satellite receiver. So new recruits basically weren't trusted in the end to basically have a 500,000 piece of kit to train with. And sometimes it wasn't always available as well. So again, they build a virtual reality scenario, they integrate our gloves into the scenario. And then again, you can build the satellite up. Again, a lot of procedural training and skilled training is where we see the gloves moving into the future. And then in terms of the companies that use, one of the biggest areas that we actually look to scout out as a company and look to have partnerships with are the system integrators that we call them. So people that are creating virtual reality environments. We have a software partnership program where we basically look to have a partnership with these system integrators, and we want to get them integrating our gloves into as many of their own scenarios as possible to, one, enhance their user experience for their customers, and obviously for us to sell gloves to them as well in the future and their customers. So that's one of the biggest areas that we see is the actual people building the scenarios.
Lovely. So we'll get into the software partnership program, but before getting into that, now I want to stick to this use cases, because I mean there's not many who understand haptic feedbacks and how it's going to be used. You mentioned how it's being used for military and training, and I see a huge use case in healthcare. Would you like to elaborate on further use cases of the Senseglove?
Yeah, so with healthcare, it's a little bit more of a tricky situation because the procedural training in healthcare, it's fine. You can do lots of different things in healthcare. So say if you want to simulate giving somebody an injection, which is a relatively low risk procedural training. But if you move across the scale to something more dangerous, like maybe a heart bypass or an open heart surgery, that kind of training can't really be done in virtual reality yet, especially with gloves because of the accuracy. So in one part of healthcare, it can definitely be used on the procedural side. But when you get into the highly skilled, highly dangerous side, you have to be a little bit careful because obviously if you're training somebody, you're basically telling them this is how it has to be done. And there's lots of regulations, lots of rules on what can and can't be trained in that area. But healthcare is a big one. We do lots of work with universities, mainly in America on the healthcare side. But they also work sort of in collaboration with big corporations who maybe fund the projects that they're doing. So we actually don't get to look too deeply into what they're creating sometimes because they're quite secretive on what they're creating. Because obviously sometimes I don't want people to maybe steal their ideas. But healthcare, is a big one for us in the future for sure.
Right. I think, the way things are going, with Web 3.0, decentralization, I think, I hope that we move from patenting ideas and products to, creating an open source thing, because I guess that's the only way we can accelerate technology and the growth of technology, because if you go to see with the COVID thing, the only reason I think we had a vaccine so fast was because the entire globe kind of collaborated, all the scientists all collaborated. And I guess that's the way I think you can accelerate, any technology, specifically, now AR, VR, MR, the Metaverse, which is in such a nascent stage. Would you like to, because I was on a website and it said that the use case could also be telerobotics, would you like to talk about that? And as a product, I mean, at this point in time, you guys have gloves. Are you guys looking into expanding into bodysuit and stuff like that? And what would be the further use cases? Because LBVREs are a place where, at least, people are using it in a big way, so, and that could be like one way to drive adoption of XR also.
Yeah. So in terms of telerobotics, that was mainly used for our DK1. At the Nova can be used for telerobotics as well. But with the DK1, we had several use cases. Again, mainly R&D projects. Not many of them are at the stage where they can actually be implemented into anything other than an R&D project as of now. That's just where the technology's at. One of the use cases we had with the DK1 was with a UK military company. I'm not thinking I'm allowed to say the name, but they basically wanted to take out dangerous or suspicious objects out of a sports bag. So say something's left in an airport that could be suspicious, and you don't want to, it could potentially be an explosive. You don't want a human to go over there and check it out. So you send a robot, a gripper comes out of the bag, and it's actually all operated by somebody miles away. So he can then operate the gripper, pull out all the things from the bag to make sure there's nothing dangerous in there. So that's one of the use cases. There's been a few other ones for power lines. So when power line goes down, and you obviously don't want to risk a human life trying to fix that, they want to have a gripper, basically, again, that can pull the power lines down and make sure that there's no human life getting injured, as well as nuclear power plants that want to be cleaned. Obviously, you don't want to send a human inside a nuclear reactor to clean it. Better off sending a robot with a scrubbing device, and they can get rid of the nuclear waste. So they're the few R&D projects that have been worked on with our product. But there'll be more in the future for sure.
Robotics, telerobotics, virtual reality. I think the use cases are going to be really, really cool. And we're just scratching the surface, and we just understanding these interactions. How do we use these devices or tools to kind of in this very, very dangerous situations. Are there any plans to expand your product lines, going beyond gloves, to bodysuits and things like that? Because there's other competitors who have your full bodysuit, so.
Yeah, so we, look, we've done lots of research and development on our own of, making maybe a sense arm where you have it attaches to the glove and it runs all the way up to the shoulder to try and stimulate weight. So we've looked into lots of different things. But at the moment, I think we've decided we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. We think there's going to be a big enough market for just hands. So I think for now, we're going to stick to just hands, mainly with the Nova for the virtual reality training. And then possibly we'll be releasing a new version of the DK1, possibly for teleoperations. That's a maybe at this point. We haven't concretely confirmed whether we're going to do that. It's still it's an idea, but it's one of those things. As a company, you don't want to spread yourself too thin. And we have lots of extremely smart people that work for the company with unbelievable ideas. But then it's actually turning it into a commercial product that we can sell, which can sometimes be the hardest thing. So we're balancing creativity with actually being able to sell something. So for now, just hands.
Yeah, so you were mentioning that you've got great team members who are doing something really cool with the space of haptic feedback, innovating, doing really cool things. Where do you think this is going to go in the next 10 years? If you had to paint a picture of, what haptic feedback is going to look like, when do you think it's going to get realistic, where how to emulate or touch and feel?
Ooh. Well, there are companies out there that do give you different types of sensations. So you've got a company like Haptics, who are probably the most famous a haptic and force feedback glove. They have microfluid technology, which gives skin deformations and other sorts of sensations that feel like touching on the palm of the hand, which is really where you actually feel most of the feeling of the hand. But with that technology comes a great price, and we're a long way away from having something like that in a B2C market, for example. Meta released, you would have seen, they released a video of their R&D team with a similar microfluid glove, and it sent the internet or the metaverse world a little bit crazy because everyone thought this is going to be a real product when it was just really in their R&D lab and they were just showing off a sneak peek of what they've been working on. So in my opinion, we won't have anything like that, I don't think, in the next 10 years that's on a consumer level. In the next 20, possibly. Meta are throwing millions upon millions at their R&D lab and the metaverse, and so is everybody else. So maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic on my on my prediction, but I think we're still a long way away for the B2C market, definitely.
Lovely. You're mentioning about your software partnership program. So if I am a virtual reality developer and I build a virtual reality game, a film, or environment, how do I go about building haptic, touch and feel interactions into the content?
So basically, we have two SDKs. So we're compatible with Unity and Unreal. So if you are building in one of those two environments, then it's absolutely fine. We have a plugin. You basically just drag it over into your Unity scene, and then you can start building with our sort of interactive builder. So it takes about 2 different lines of code. You add a grabbable code, which is called SG grabbable, and then you basically can just pick up any object. Our SDK has been made to be as easy to use as possible, because what we didn't want is these software developers to be put off by maybe having to write everything themselves in terms of the code. So we try and give them as much as we can for free. And our SDK at the moment isn't licensed, which is something quite unheard of in our industry, with everyone having licensing fees and everything like that. We're trying to stay away from that for now. Like in the future, maybe it'll be a small license, but often for the developers, we'll just give it to them for free. That might be just a corporation license, maybe. But for anybody in our software program, they'll always get our license for free.
Right. What's the price point of the Senseglove, and what's your view on India market? Is there any plans to kind of launch over here?
So the price point is €4,500 for a set. So with that, you get the gloves, the hardware and the soft gloves. You get all the charging equipment. You get the tracking mounts with them as well, because we need some sort of tracking solution on the back of the gloves at the moment. Until we build a computer vision. So to just go into that a little bit, we're building a computer vision algorithm that basically reads the gloves as hands. So how you would normally have hand tracking through an Oculus or a Pico, at the moment, if you try and turn on hand tracking with our gloves on, it doesn't recognize the hand because it's not a hand model, it's a glove model. So we're building an algorithm that will basically allow you to have no tracking solution other than just basically glove tracking, which is going to be our version of hand tracking. And that's going to be ready hopefully at the end of Q3 of this year, because at the moment we're having to use tracking solutions. So you have a glove on your hand, and then say if you're using the Oculus, you have to strap the controller to the back of the glove, which is it's kind of, it's not the most ideal solution because it adds a little bit of weight and it's a little bit bulky. But we do stuff with HTC. So you have the very small Vive plugs that you can strap to the gloves as well. And also the wrist trackers. They've got new wrist trackers, which basically you just attach it to the wrist and you don't have any external external controller or any of external tracking device on the glove, which is really nice. So that's in the works and should be released in Q3 of this year. yeah, it's not an easy algorithm to build, let's just say. But we've got a very interesting and funny guy called Martijn, who is a computer vision expert. He's always on LinkedIn showing off his work. So I'll send you his LinkedIn, and you can check out some of his videos, because they're he somehow makes computer vision interesting and funny, which is not the easiest thing to do.
Lovely. How cool is that? David, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. We're getting into an exciting space, and I think the role of haptics is going to be a very huge role, because the where we are going, the metaverse, Web 3.0, the virtual world, I think for human to or digital avatars to interact, or humans to interact with the digital avatars and the digital world, I think there'll be the role of haptic is going to be really, really, really huge. What's the roadmap for Senseglove? And maybe paint a picture of how Senseglove is going to fit into the metaverse.
Yeah, of course. So, our overall goal as a company is to be the mouse and keyboard of the future. So we believe in the next 10, 20, 30 years, nobody will be using a smartphone, nobody will be using a laptop. We believe that we will be going to probably AR devices, and that will be our normal way of using things. So we want to be some sort of mouse and keyboard. So that will be a very, very small device on the back of the hand, which will give you every kind of feedback that you can imagine, whether that's heat, whether that's force feedback, whether that's vibrotactile feedback, whether that's skin deformation, tactile feedback. We want to be able to offer all of it. Right now it seems we're a long way away from that, which nearly every company that's dabbling in the space is. But with the amount of money getting pumped into the industry and the amount of R&D, I don't think we're going to be that far behind any company, to be honest with you. That's sort of our roadmap and where we want to end up. There'll be probably a new product or a new version of our Nova coming along in the next couple of years as well, which will be even smaller, easier to use, and with even more feedback, hopefully.
Lovely. David, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. I really hope that anyone and everyone around the world who's kind of, laying the building blocks of, creating this metaverse or the infrastructure for the metaverse, we take a very collaborative approach, because there's two ways where this could pan out. One way, we could go towards the Black Mirror kind of approach, where we get into a world which is extremely dystopian, or we get into a world which is collaborative, which is human first, and we ask questions before we kind of build these products and tools. Because yes, we are in the process of building a virtual world which could be indistinguishable from a physical world, and that's what virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality is going to do in the next few years. And yes, I mean these initial period, the next couple of decades, I mean there's going to be great use cases, and there's going to be lots of economical benefits for all those players, developers who are laying the building blocks. But yes, I really hope and I wish and I pray that we all go in together and do something where it's a collaborative and we think about an approach which is human first. So thank you, really appreciate. I think you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I hope we build with human in mind first, and not maybe profit in mind first. But we'll see how that goes. But I what you just said, I 100% agree with. So fingers crossed.
Super. So thanks a lot, David. Really appreciate this. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye bye. Thank you. Thank you, David. Really appreciate this.
Thanks.